One Colorado ballot measure has gained national attention.
Amendment 64 would regulate marijuana like alcohol, allowing adults 21 and over to possess small amounts of the drug.
Some of the latest polls reveal a growing support for this amendment. News Channel 5's Amanda Brandeis takes us into the future and gives us a reality check of what happens next if the amendment does pass. Amanda?
Christina and Jorma, I went to Denver to talk to one of the founding fathers of the bill. Support for Amendment 64 has grown, and a recent public policy poll showed that 53% support it, 43% opposed it, and 5% were undecided. So I wanted answers as to how Amendment 64 would work if voters did say yes.
I wanted to get like a quarter of sativa.
This November, eyes are on Colorado. After the election, our state could begin its journey to making history.
80 years ago, Colorado voters approved a ballot initiative to repeal alcohol prohibition, and they did so prior to the federal government. And that was the type of activity that we saw nationwide. And we can do the same thing when it comes to marijuana prohibition.
While the details of Amendment 64 are brief in election booklets, founders of it worked on the final draft for 6 months. The process involved receiving input and feedback from dozens of organization representatives, attorneys, and business owners. Details in the entire version provide many answers to questions on voters' minds. Now, if the amendment does pass, some changes will go into effect immediately, but others will require more legislation.
It removes the criminal penalties for adults who are 21 and older who are simply possessing marijuana privately. And so almost immediately that will no longer be a crime.
Other impacts will take place over time, like marijuana centers opening throughout the state.
The legislature will then have this upcoming session to develop some rules and some laws to govern how these marijuana stores and facilities will operate.
Cities and counties will also have control over their own regulations, including how products are sold, labeled, and security associated with them, advertising, and can even prohibit marijuana centers.
This is very similar to how we see dry counties. For example, there are dry counties throughout the country where it's legal to possess alcohol, but it's not legal for it to be sold. This is really a matter of giving localities the right to control marijuana how they feel is best for their community.
There will be an opportunity for local governments to decide whether or not people can have stores that sell it. But even without that, people can still possess it and grow it on their own, and so we're still going to be right in the middle of the marijuana industry.
If Amendment 64 is passed, marijuana centers could look identical to this, an already operating medical marijuana center. One of the biggest differences between medical marijuana centers and non-medical marijuana centers would be an excise tax.
The initiative requires the General Assembly to enact a tax of up to 15% on wholesale sales, and the first $40 million of that each year will be directed towards public school construction. By regulating marijuana like alcohol, we can take it out of the underground market and out of the hands of criminals and put it behind the counter in retail stores that are licensed, that are regulated.
One other impact its passing might have is allowing farmers to produce hemp.
We're importing more industrial hemp than any other nation in the world, and we're the only industrialized nation that doesn't allow our farmers to produce it. Amendment 64 would allow for the regulated cultivation of industrial hemp, which would give our farmers throughout the state a very useful and easy to grow new crop that we can corner the market on here in Colorado.
It's also important to note that many things won't change if Amendment 64 passes. One is that employee drug policies can remain the same. 2, driving under the influence of marijuana is still illegal. And 3, those under 21 will receive the same punishment as they do now if caught possessing. And it still remains the same that Amendment 64 goes against federal law.
For people who might think that they can do this legally, it sets them up to be blindsided, and perhaps it's not as legal as they think it might be. But it certainly puts law enforcement and other elected officials on the local and state level in a position to where they are either going to violate the Constitution of Colorado or they're going to violate federal laws.
There's no reason or law that prevents Colorado from passing this initiative. The federal government has largely respected Colorado's tightly regulated medical marijuana system.
The federal government really sort of stated at some point that they weren't going to get involved with medical marijuana issues. But then they started to see the prevalence of the problems with medical marijuana issues and have started to really, take another look at how much enforcement they're going to be involved with.
Federal marijuana laws specifically allow for states to design their own policies. So Amendment 64 is simply proposing a new, more sensible approach, and we have the right to do that.
Now it's up to voters to decide whether or not the state will expand marijuana regulation to a much bigger sea of citizens. To see the full text of Amendment 64, you can head to our web channel at KREXTV.com. Reporting live in the newsroom for News Channel 5, I'm Amanda Brandeis.